Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rex. I am with my co-host John, as always. John, hello.
Hello.
We are finally here. We are at the finale of the When Dinosaurs Roamed America. Probably the episode that, dare I say, most people who keep up with this particular series are most looking forward to. What do you think?
Same.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would make sense. It does have a lot of the people's generally most favorite animals in it. It's probably just the most discussions out there that are also going on out and about. They tend to go about these animals as well. So it's a very interesting. You would call it a coincidence, but it's really not, is it? Now, let's just jump straight into it and go into the setting of the episode. So, I have a Hell Creek formation setting, and would you like to quickly explain what is in the slide, please, John?
Sure. So I have a picture from the documentary where it says South Dakota 65 million years ago. The setting takes place in the Hell Creek Formation, obviously during the Maastrichtian stage of the late Cretaceous. On the right is obviously where I would be putting the where exactly would be taking place. It's really right at the very edge of the KPG mass extinction. In fact, um, the KPG mass extinction happened a million years prior to where this section is this segment is set at, but regardless, it's around that same air time period, time setting and such. There's a picture of the Hell Creek Formation in the modern day, and then on the bottom I have a picture, a map of the Hell Creek and Lance formations with a red star put at where I would potentially this segment takes place in back during the Cretaceous period. So, in terms of paleoecology, the setting is pretty, I'd say, pretty accurate to what we know about the Hell Creek Formation. It was probably very swampy, very marshy, very subtropical. Uh, I believe the Discovery Channel filmed this in Florida, in the Florida Everglades, or somewhere close to there. The I really like the tree choice for it. It definitely it definitely matches with what we know about the Hell Creek.
Sorry,
The
can
biggest
I ask you to hold on for a second for me, please? Are we
Sure.
not supposed to change the slide here by any chance?
What do you mean?
Well, when you were describing like trees and all that stuff, like, do we have anything that we need to show, or do we just stay on
Oh,
the
yeah,
slide?
we can change slides. Yeah,
Oh, okay, yeah,
I was gonna mention grass after the trees, but
yeah. The grass. Well, of course, there's always the grass question, isn't it? No, I
right.
mean, to be honest, I actually don't think we, come to think of it, I don't even think we have a specific slide to show the grass. But if we were to, I mean, outside of obviously the shots that we see in the program. Um, but okay, anyway, sorry, carry on then. Carry on.
No,
Um,
you're fine. You're fine. Um, I guess you'll in shots of the show you'll see quite a bit of grass, and I understand that grass first appeared during the late Cretaceous, like by the Maastrichtian. It's debatable how expansive it was back then. It could have been pretty abundant, maybe it wasn't. But just to mention, because I know that a common thing is that, well, grass didn't exist with dinosaurs, and technically the answer is yes, but actually no, because even though grass did first appear during the late Cretaceous, it was probably not nearly as common as we would think it is. So outside of that, I think the general ecology with the trees and such, the palms and all that makes a lot of sense, and it works for this segment.
okay. Yeah, I just realized also that we indeed did not have anything separate to look into paleobotany when you started describing it, but then I realized, like, why am I even saying anything about it if we went over the slides just prior to the recording? So, But remember, I made promise to my viewers. I try to keep it as raw as possible. Normally, I would have just said stop. Let's just cut the whole thing out and start over again. But nah, I'm not doing it. We're doing it raw, baby, 100% raw. Okay. So.
All right, we can move on to the next slide then if you want.
I don't mind. Are you done with the setting?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, one of the other things, I mean, since you already mentioned it, but I basically wanted to say yes, we are 1 million years off in the time period for this particular program. It's not 65 million years ago, it's 66. So bear that in mind, please. So where shall we go to next? Which would be the best slide to go to, John? What do you think? Do we go into the size or anything else, or anything, or just animals right away?
Let's start with the animals.
Okay.
The next slide on my thing is Triceratops.
Yep.
So
sounds good. Let's go with the trike. So I was very puzzled because obviously the show just references it as basically Triceratops. It doesn't tell us any details, but based on the fact that it's got this type of very, well, I would say awkward, but you know in what way I mean, very higher up on the snout sitting nasal horn, bigger and more prominent brow horns, that seems to indicate that this was Triceratops horridus, which would be of an earlier time period at around 68-ish million years ago, not at 66 million years ago prior to the extinction of the dinosaurs. In which case this would have been Triceratops prorsus, and both of the models I can see here, they are on the left hand side basically is the show, in the middle we have the skeletal mounts, and on the right we have the models from our beloved prehistoric kingdom, which me and you have yet to do some videos about, by the way, but that will be a topic for another time. And
yes.
I'd probably say we can leave that almost until the end of the year to sort of do the recap of how long they have come, you know, how far they have come in terms of the year time span, and just do like every so often, but that's a different thing. Now, yes, wonderfully done models, although I'm not a fan of the blue color there very much on the top, on the, what was it, is that on the horridus or is that on the process? I'm not sure actually. I think it's on the horridus, right? Because of the horn. Yeah, it's on the horridus. So yeah, I, aside from that, yes, wonderfully made models for comparison, for you to look at in the meantime. And other than that, I would say in terms of Triceratops, there was a scene where they are depicted as if they sense danger, and this is one of the things that is key for me to understanding. Now, do we have anything that can tell us about how good the Triceratops hearing was, and or any other kind of sense, or maybe their ability to sense the vibration when that T-Rex is trying to ambush them from the trees?
So to the best of my knowledge, Triceratops has been argued to have had not so good vision, which fair enough, based on its horns and all that. But also, it does not have apparently did not have a very good sense of smell, which has surprised me. So theoretically, hearing would be maybe its best sense, but I do not know that off the top of my head. I don't know if that's accurate. And in terms of the documentary, the implication is that when the Tyrannosaurus Rex steps on like a loose branch or something and makes it snap, the Triceratops out in the field has hearing that is sharp enough to hear the snap all the way out in the field when it happened in the forest. And I'm not really, I feel like it's a little bit of a stretch for the Triceratops to be hearing it all the way out there. So
Bearing in
maybe it had
mind,
very good
yeah, sorry. You
I
go
was going to
first.
say maybe it had very good hearing, but I don't know about that.
Well, you have to also bear in mind the way this physics behind sound, right? You know that when you have a lot of trees, why it's difficult for to hear outside of it
Right.
is because the sound waves do not travel, you know, very far. They will just get reflected, so you're more likely to be basically trapped. I mean, it can work to your favor, but it can also work to your disadvantage. But when it comes to stepping on something like a branch, this is probably something you're not really gonna hear unless it's super, super loud. Like with a very loud crackling sound. In which case you will hear it almost no matter whether it's an open field or even if it's surrounded by the dense, foliage. So,
Right.
as far as I'm aware of, at least that's how I think it would go. And having said that, yes, I agree. I don't think it would be very much possible for them to do that. Now, the other thing, I think, in fact, on the Triceratops, we don't really have a whole lot else to address here, other than what we have already said. So, do you have anything to comment on the Triceratops?
I think you covered pretty much all, but this is meant to be a Horridus when in reality it should be a Prorsus. So I think we can move on to the next animal,
Okay,
which on my
let's.
PowerPoint is the Struthiomimus.
How does that song go in the Land Before Time too? Remember when they were singing? Because there were two Struthiomimus there, and it was like, "This
Yeah, yeah.
Struthiomimus won't settle for the eggs," or something like that. I can't remember.
It's been so long since I've watched those movies.
Yeah.
Like
I do remember the egg song, but I specifically remember this line because this is one of the few times in the whole on all of these in the franchise where they actually use the species scientific names rather than just their colloquial sort of name, the way they usually refer to things like.
right.
So, but anyway, appears very briefly. Do we actually even know if it was a Struthiomimus, or could it have been maybe Ornithomimus velox, perhaps? Or
It could have been. I'm trying to think. Why did I use? So I think it was called Struthiomimus on the fandom wiki, which I know is very reliable. It's not addressed as Struthiomimus or Ornithomimus in the show. It's literally just a cameo that appears. It's the same thing as the pterosaur from the third segment, where it's not really addressed by name. It's not even necessarily addressed at all. It's just there. Um, and so I think so. I'm basing the name itself off of the uh, fandom wiki. But as for a Hell Creek ornithomimid, I feel like that's very up in the air in terms of like what that has been, and I'm not sure if I have all the details on that. But basically, it's like I don't know if we know specifically if it was a Struthiomimus or Ornithomimus that was living specifically at the very end of the Cretaceous, at 66 million years ago. And so it's a little bit controversial, but I think based on because the model is like so brief and there's not very good images of it, I couldn't really tell you if it's better as an Ornithomimus or Struthiomimus. So for right now, I put it as a Struthiomimus species, but I think yeah, I don't really know what it is, but I wanted to give it attention because it does show up in the episode. So
there are apparently ways to tell them apart just if you don't have them next to each other side by side, but it has to do a lot with the skeletal proportions of their head, limbs, and I think the eye, circular, whatever thing magic is called. I keep forgetting what it's called, but you get what I'm
the
saying.
sclerotic ring.
Sclerotic rig, yes, yes, yes. My God, I forget these things so easily. But yeah, so I think there are ways to tell them apart, but it's it's a bit tricky because in the show, of course, sometimes the proportions are exaggerated, and it's hard to say whether this is intentional or not. It's just can be a bit tricky, but I'm happy to go with Struthiomimus. To be honest, I don't really mind. It really doesn't make much difference here since the show itself doesn't really reference it, and fandom
Right.
wiki just decided to stick with whatever, I suppose, rather than trying to themselves debate what one is it. you know. So
Right, exactly.
now, uh, shall we go to the next animal now on the list?
Yep. Next animal on my list is Edmontosaurus annectens.
Yep, and that's gonna be the interesting one to discuss too. So, in terms of the time period and placement, it's correct because it spanned from 68 all the way to the extinction. So, one thing that I was quite curious about is that um, the show, of course, the show calls it Anatotitan. At the time, that's what it was known as. And now we just know that it's basically Edmontosaurus annectens. So that's for those who still aren't very sure, which I don't think there are many of you, but let's just get it out of the way. So Edmontosaurus also. Let's do the size. The size that you have included is obviously from, I presume, the skeletal drawing you found online, which I believe you also mentioned to me prior, that it was the best one you could find of this particular animal, which is fair enough. My question, however, is, even though we do see references being made by wiki article and such, that they could grow up to 14 or whatever 15 meters length, there is no actual description of specimens of these type of Edmontosaurus that we can actually just walk up to, look up and see how complete they are, what sort of things can we actually see as reliable information. I'm not gonna say that it's not possible, I'm just saying that I feel like scratching my head about it a little bit, because I've always been more of a proponent to place them between 10 to 12 meters length, and in some cases, well, 12 meters being basically similar to T-Rex length wise. In terms of mass, maybe a little bit smaller-ish, depending, of course, because they were not particularly wide, if I'm correct, because they were more, they didn't have very wide bodies in comparison to, like, say, the T-Rex. Like, T-Rex is, I think, a bit wider, of the same length than the Edmontosaurus is. If I am correct, again, I'm not sure, but I think so. Okay, let me know in the comments. The other, so yeah, what do you think about this one? About the size?
So, just referencing the show real quick, they do mention that Anatotitan, or I was supposed to say Anatotitan, Edmontosaurus is, for hadrosaur standards, quite big. That most hadrosaurs measure around 30 feet long, whereas Edmontosaurus annectens specifically measures around 40 feet, which, to the best of my knowledge, is still pretty accurate. That's still a pretty reasonable size for Edmontosaurus. There also are specimens that are right now claimed, even though not properly described, as being about almost 50 feet in length, which is probably what the holotype on display here of X-Rex is suggested to have been. There's like X-Rex, and there's like another Edmontosaurus specimen that's like super big comparatively to other Edmontosaurus specimens. To the best of my knowledge, these specimens have been argued as being very rare and very specific specimens that do not exactly uh they may be like rare exceptions to the rule and not like the general average size of Edmontosaurus if they were as big as they claim, which again, we don't really have proper descriptions of these specimens. So and even if we did, and even if they were like as big as they claim to be, they may not have been very common. It may not have been a very common thing. These two might have just been giants among their own species. So in terms of size, I actually think the documentary is pretty close to what current sizes for Edmontosaurus and annectens are, which is good. And in terms of the model, I think it looks really nice. But going back to sizes, yeah, I think that the reason why I chose the skeletal was because there's not a whole lot of proper skeletals of Edmontosaurus and annectens out there. And this was one of the few ones that I thought, okay, this actually provides us with some data as to what the specimens are. But if they're not properly described, then take this as like open to interpretation, I guess, um, and for further study.
Yeah, I would probably just leave it at that as well, and at best, if they do truly get that big, maybe it was really just an anomaly, given how big the sample of the animals really are. But, okay, now a few notes about this. Do we actually know how good the Edmontosaurus senses were? And because the series also depicts like their sentries presumably were able to be, to alert to danger. So, like, I almost felt like there was the way they were depicting it. It was a bit too sophisticated for any species to have that kind of behavior, and not sure even if dinosaurs specifically were on that level to be able to do something like that. I mean, obviously it's impossible to test, but I'm kind of feeling like it's a bit of a stretch, and more feels like more it's like an artistic move rather than it is actually scientific.
Right. I think for Edmontosaurus, I don't off the top of my head, I don't know about how good its senses were. In terms of herd structure, that's probably going to be something that will be continuously a debate as to how sophisticated dinosaur social groups were. Hadrosaurs, we have the most evidence for being very gregarious animals, but that just means that that they tended to group together. That doesn't mean they had very complicated. That by itself doesn't mean that they had complicated social structures where you had sentries um, marked out for certain places and whatnot. So to watch out for danger and such. So in this case, I would say that it's very, very much speculative in terms of how sophisticated and Montosaurus or any hadrosaur for that matter was in terms of their sociability. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying they didn't have like rudimentary, maybe instinctual sentries where, for example, like hadrosaurs, maybe were more prone. Hadrosaurs maybe on the outside of a group may have been more prone to hearing things better than others closer inward to the group. Maybe not. But we don't know those specifics. We won't know those specifics until we maybe get a time machine and travel back in time. And I'm not going to get into that kind of discussion. So for right now, it's very speculative. And do I? It's just take it as open to interpretation as to how structured hadrosaur herds and especially Edmontosaurus herds were like, assuming that they even were herding animals, which I know hadrosaurs are commonly depicted as herding animals, and we do have evidence of them being gregarious. But specifics are it's always good to have like that specific evidence for Edmontosaurus, um, which I think we do, but don't quote me on that.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. So, in that case, are you happy with this animal? Do you have anything to add to it as well?
Uh, I don't have anything to add. It's a good model. I think it's generally accurate, so I'm pretty solid with it. We can move on to the next animal.
I am overall happy as well with maybe just. I mean, obviously the fenestrae, the outlines, like I would probably
Yep.
debate that part, but other than that, I am. Let's just say I'm alright with it. It's not my favorite, however, and anatomically as well, it kind of does sometimes look a bit awkward in some shots, I guess. But I would say at best, to best represent my view on it, I would say I'm alright with it. So that's where I stand with it, I guess.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next one in the order, and that is, we're doing the animal. What was it? It's a T-Rex juvenile, right?
Next one on my list is Quetzalcoatlus, but we can do T-Rex juvenile first if we want.
Okay, yeah, sure. Let's go with that. I don't mind.
Yeah.
T-Rex. It says T-Rex juvenile. So, few things I wanted to know to say that. Well, of course, yes. Well, since we're doing T-Rex as a general profile at this point, anyway. But
Yeah.
yes, well placed in terms of the time period and location. Now, in terms of the model, there is one scene where we see that the T-Rex that charges basically at the Triceratops herd. We see that it's later been presented as if it's a 17-foot long teenager, which is probably an error in modeling there a little bit and scaling, because it looks pretty freaking big even in comparison to these trikes there. And there's no
Right.
freaking way it's that big, okay? So if it was just a juvenile, or not juvenile, but teenager, let's just say, okay? So that's a bit of a problem there. That's a technical issue, however, that's not an accuracy issue as far as I'm concerned. Now, the next thing that I wanted to go into is probably we should go into the, rather than the appearances, maybe we should go into the behavior, because that might be a way to kind of better explain this whole difference that they're trying to show off when it comes to the juveniles and the adults. So it appears that they're taking up this all the probably still existing, as far as I know, I don't believe he really changed his views on this. That is Dr. Curie's, Philip Curie's, that is, with whom I do have an interview, by the way, on this channel, done a few years back, so you can find that if you want as well. Just look it up on a search function. It should be up there. Did it together with Josh. It's a 2-part interview, as far as I remember. Now, basically, yes, that they were able to hunt in groups or packs. And I kind of find this to be a little bit too much of a stretch when they try to portray it as if it was really an organized group and pack in that sense, where they would also all stick together throughout the whole time. So what I mean is that they could come together same way like crocodiles did, just to not necessarily to socialize, but just hang out in the same spot where it's popular to catch prey, for example, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that there is any social kind of relationship involved with them. The best you would probably see there is occasional bickering if they try to bully someone else away from the kill to get the first bite in, maybe fighting with it over the territory or over mating rights. But otherwise, if they're just chilling, they could just be literally sitting there in the same manner, just catching sunlight and really doing nothing, just lazing around. That doesn't mean, however, they are part of the group together. That doesn't mean they are in any way related that way, if you know what I mean. And well, the show tries to portray them like they would stick to the same group. And they were showing how the teenagers, the younger ones, they were more agile and faster, so they would run and chase the prey, and then obviously isolate their prey from the herd, from the numbers, and then they would eventually have the bigger and stronger adults to deliver the ambushing, killing blow to them by a bite to the neck or to the head or whatever, and delivering their bone-crushing bite, if you will. So I also noticed that they well, let's actually talk about this first, and then we will go to the next point. So what are your thoughts about this one? John?
Hello?
Yeah, now
You
you're
cut out.
here. Yeah, what are your thoughts about this point, about the group behavior that I just said?
So, I would say, I mean, I pretty much agree with what you mentioned about that. I pretty much I think that Tyrannosaurus sociability is very difficult to. Same thing with hadrosaurs, even where it's very difficult to gauge how sociable tyrannosaurs were, and so as a result of that, I think that what we're showing this in the segment itself is that it feels more like the parents teaching the young how to hunt, which I'm pretty okay with. But as a general rule, I think that tyrannosaurs having very sophisticated pack hunting is probably not something that we can really prove. And it may not have even been something they could even do. It was probably more like your comparison with crocodiles, where they were gregarious and would come together, and then they would uh, sort of hunt almost like sort of like a mob style thing, like with Komodo dragons or crocodilians. So for something like this, I think this is one of the better depictions where again it feels more like it's the parents teaching the kids how to hunt. But outside of that, it's I wouldn't say it's like something that would be a general rule of thumb for tyrannosaurs to be hunting as a group, specifically in this particular style. Probably would not have been nearly as sophisticated as what's shown in the documentary.
And I'll be honest, even this whole idea of parents teaching young how to hunt, I don't even think that even crocodilians do that. they just kind of just go with it, basically. They start with small prey and then they gradually just size up and up and up until they get to the point where they start finding out their limits, if you will. Because there are many cases when they would try to attack maybe prey that is perhaps too big or too powerful for them to tackle, and sometimes they pay a bitter price for it, other times they get away with it and they just learn to gauge the suitable size for their target prey items. I would probably be more willing to bet on something like that than I would be willing to think that there were parents there who would teach them how to hunt. But that is my personal bet on this. So, because if you remember, we also did a video about the prehistoric... No, sorry, what was it? The real T-Rex, right, that's the one. I'm thinking of Prehistoric Planet, but we haven't done that yet. Which we will do, but not yet, right? But you remember Dr. Carr as well also pointed out something that I actually kind of tend to agree with it, in that sense that they weren't as sophisticated and as smart probably as some of the bird species alive as well, because birds do take their intelligence on a slightly different level by comparison to other archosaurs. So I would probably say that they were a bit more primitive and a bit more quote-unquote boring, you could say, but I mean, obviously it wouldn't be that boring, but I'm just saying that they weren't as sophisticated. At least that's what I don't think they were, even to the point where they would be able to teach their young to do things. I just don't think that's something that would happen. They would protect them maybe until they get bigger, but once they get bigger they probably just go on their own, as far as I can think of. So what do you think about that?
Makes sense to me.
But let's continue with more Tyrannosaurus. I want to go to the next slide. Did you want anything to be added here, or are you happy with this part of the Tyrannosaurus? Because there's more about Tyrannosaurus to talk about later down the line.
We can probably talk more about Tyrannosaurus in the next slide or in a future slide. I guess for me, it's like it's funny that we talked about pack hunting just now because I did have a slide for it, but that's okay. We can move on to the next section.
No. Let's open up the pack hunting actually. So we did obviously just cover it, and this is just to show you guys quickly what we have come up with. I presume that the top left is from I cannot see very well from here, but is that from the Dino Gangs book by any chance, or?
So the top left is from Dino Gangs. The top right is from the Royal Tyrrell Museum.
Yep.
The bottom right is, I believe, from Brian Frensdek. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but that's from like an old school picture of Tyrannosaurus hunting in Montosaurus. And then I forget who the artist is for the bottom left, but it's basically two juvenile Tyrannosaurus rexes biting one another. And the reason why I included that is because there is a scene in the documentary when a juvenile T-Rex returns to its parents and it gets assaulted by one of its siblings, which, I don't know if the evidence existed for that back then, but face biting and, social aggression between Tyrannosaurs is pretty common, is pretty well known at this point in the fossil record. So it's kind of neat that they show that in the documentary as well.
I agree with that as well, even though I don't believe that there was parents. I think there was only just a mother with everyone else basically being her kid. I don't think the father figure was actually there. I think it was just a mother with the pack, I think, if I'm correct, and that was it. At least that's what I remember, anyway. But not too sure. We will get into the few claims that they do make, I think, later in a few seconds. But I wanted to quickly add to the face biting part, is that many people, I think, mistaken the idea. They think that it's the signs of them being violent to each other is a sign that they were antisocial. I disagree with that claim. I think that this could actually, in some cases, in many cases in fact, prove the opposite, that they were frequently interacting with each other, and that biting basically each other, whether heavily or lightly, may have actually just been part of the norm of their life, and proves that they were actually very much social. That's not like a proof of being antisocial, if you know what I mean. I just wanted to get this out of the way because I feel like this is frequently being framed like it's an antisocial behavior, for like evidence for the antisocial behavior, whereas I don't see it that way myself, at least. I think it's actually the evidence of the opposite, that this does show that they interacted frequently, perhaps, and also shows that this might have just been a common part of their lives overall, and is not a sign that they don't interact with each other, and if they do, it's always like this. No, I don't think that's the case. But that's my opinion, at least. So, anything to add on this part?
No, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Okay, let's go to the other Tyrannosaurus slide. And we have here on the left hand side is I think the model and then also the actual shot from the program, and on the right we have the AMNH famous mounted exhibit, which I have seen twice up front as well, and we have a model from none other than, you guessed it, Prehistoric Kingdom, which I believe me and you both actually see as currently to date one of the best, if not the best, made Tyrannosaurus interpretation as far as the looks goes in the media itself, as far as that's concerned, with like maybe few minor potential contesters to it here and there.
Right. It's definitely my top 3, so
I would agree, definitely. It's among my top 3 for sure. But which one takes the number 1 spot is probably gonna depend on when, you know, what I feel like when I wake up, basically.
Right, exactly.
Now, I wanted to say also that they are showing how T-Rex was... This is one of the things I have a problem with in terms of the depiction, when they depicted T-Rex ambushing a Triceratops. And for some reason, when it was ambushing them head-on, directly heading at the phalanx of those horns. So I just thought that I would say that. It makes no sense to me personally. I don't think how they would be not trying to outflank them instead, or ambush them from the rear if they still had a way to do it. Even if Triceratops was able to hear that there was something coming to them, I don't think that it's necessarily lost the element of when it could just come out from a different direction and just charge at them from the rear, basically. I don't know. What do you think about that particular part?
Well, my interpretation of that scene is that because it was technically still the juvenile Tyrannosaurus Rex, I think the idea they were trying to convey there was that this is a very inexperienced T-Rex because of its age. And so naturally an adult might be more cautious, might be like, all right, this isn't worth it. They're already on alert. I'd have to either bail now or I have to go from a different angle. But the juvenile is like, no, I'm gonna go and try and scare them off myself and see if that works. I know I'm putting it a bit. I don't want to make it sound like these things were like hyper intelligent and thought these exact thoughts, but I'm just trying to convey it in a way that makes sense. Where it's like the juvenile, I think you could argue maybe, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, that the juvenile doing this was because of a lack of experience, and maybe it was just very hungry, and so it was just like, well, I'm gonna try and see if I can scare them off this way. But that's very much like my subjective interpretation of the scene itself. And yeah, otherwise I would totally agree that rushing out into a full-on phalanx of Triceratops horns is not exactly the brightest of choices, but you could do it if you wanted to. um I'm just saying, like, I think that's how I would interpret the scene itself if I were being generous. But overall, yeah, it's a little weird for the juvenile, even for the juvenile, to be rushing out there and like thinking it could get anywhere with those with that whole wall of horns. So
I mean, obviously, there is one thing we forgot to mention, that we don't actually know if there was any merit to this behavior on Triceratops' side, being able to... Not to mention that I don't even think we have any positive, really, way to confirm if Triceratops was even a herd animal to begin with. And...
yeah,
Even though they're frequently
okay,
depicted as herd animals, but we don't actually
yes,
have anything to
they are
support that.
frequently depicted. They are frequently depicted as herding animals, but real quick, there's no hard evidence that they were gregarious. There's only been a couple of bone beds with multiple Triceratops individuals, and right now, the at least one of them that I'm aware of is only made up of subadults or juveniles. So it's not like we're finding whole herds of adults being buried together in the same way that we see like Pachyrhinosaurus or Centrosaurus. No such evidence exists for Triceratops.
Yeah, and definitely not that they would be able to just all of a sudden signal, it's almost like the Roman or Spartan, Macedonian phalanx. They signal and then immediately they form up in the formation, put their pikes out at the front, ready to brace the cavalry charge of the enemy, if you will. So it does come off a bit too sophisticated for for what I think. But anyway,
Right.
Back to Tyrannosaurus again. They also appear to exclusively. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Do they not imply in the show that Tyrannosaurus was exclusively a diurnal hunter, aka basically hunting during the day only, rather than being able to also hunt at night? And if so, I'm actually curious how they would come to that conclusion.
So in the show, they make a point of saying that as night falls, the a predator has a much, at least in the case of Tyrannosaurus Rex, visibility becomes really poor, depth perception decreases. Um, the implication being that Tyrannosaurus Rex probably wasn't a very nocturnal hunter. As far as I can tell, there's no specific evidence that argues for or against Tyrannosaurus being nocturnal in any fashion. There's nothing that says that it couldn't have hunted at night, but there's nothing that says that it was a very good night hunter. We have about as much evidence to say that it was purely diurnal, which we don't really have any evidence to say it was purely diurnal or crepuscular. Which for those of you at home who don't know, that means you're hunting either in like dawn or early morning or dusk or evening conditions where there's some light, but there isn't a lot of light. Um, in terms of Tyrannosaurus Rex, we just don't have that kind of evidence for it. And we would have to find something very specific about like the sclerotic rings of Tyrannosaurus Rex, which I don't think we have at the moment. We would need something like that to help gauge how good, because I believe we have some evidence for dinosaurs like Velociraptor for being nighttime predators, but for Tyrannosaurus Rex, we would need something very similar to what we have for Velociraptor to say that could it was a very good night hunter or not.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, the other thing I wanted to address is obviously the show appears to, and correct me if I'm wrong again, but it implies that there was a reverse sexual dimorphism in T-Rexes. However, we do know that it's actually a myth. There is no evidence that supports that claim. And in fact, reverse sexual dimorphism as a whole appears to be more of an exception than the general rule for the vast majority of reptilia. And if you want to know more about that, there have been a few videos that on the Reptilia series that me and Jason have done, where even to my surprise I discovered that quite a lot of snakes also apparently have not the reverse, which I thought would be universal across all snakes, but it was actually almost an even split. In some cases you would even argue the other way around. So have a look at that as well if you want to know more. But in any case, the case with Tyrannosaurus, we don't have any evidence to support reverse sexual dimorphism, as that's definitely something I would be able to label as an extraordinary claim.
Right.
Thus it would require, well, accordingly, a set of extraordinary evidence, and everything that has been so far attempted to frame it that way has been thoroughly debunked, and there was no patterns and consistency found among those claims earlier on that were made. In fact, I am more likely convinced that most dinosaurs outside of obviously aves probably had either the default dimorphism, with basically males being larger and more dominant and aggressive, similar to like how crocodiles are and most of the bird species are, and many other reptile species are as well, than they were of any other type. But that's what I'm seeing, at least, just overall, because that's the case on many of them. Again, I cannot solely conclude that just because of that, but this is what I'm more inclined to believe personally. Whether that's the case or not, of course, I would hope that we will eventually find out for sure. So, what do you think about this particular claim that they were trying to frame in the show?
Well, it's funny you mention so the funny thing about the documentary is that they say a male can reach 40 feet in length, or something to the effect that that's a pretty average size for Tyrannosaurus Rex. The female, they say, is even bigger. They don't give a specific measurement for that. They don't say is she weighed more, that she was longer than the male. They just say that the female was bigger. Now, given that we have some very exceptionally massive Tyrannosaurus Rex specimens like Stu and Scotty, and I think a couple more that exist out there that um, got really big, even by Tyrannosaurus Rex standards. Um, I can believe that in this particular case, and again, maybe I'm being very generous here, but in this specific case, they're referring to a female that happens to be quite a bit bigger, or at the very least is edging out her mate. And I know that right now the idea is that we're only shown a female and her offspring, but whenever I watch the scene, I've tried to count how many T Rex are shown in the entire segments, because I think they're not very consistent with how many T Rex they show individually. I feel like there is a male, like an adult male, that could be the father of those juveniles in there. It's not hard set in stone. But anyways, the reason why I bring this up is because I think they make a mention of saying, yeah, the male 40 feet long, average size for Tyrannosaurus Rex, or average length, I should say. But for the female, they say that she's bigger. And even though they don't give us any particular measurements to say why she is bigger or how big she is compared to the male, um, if I were being generous, I would say that this could be an instance of them saying that this female in particular is bigger than the male. But if we were to go to the fossil evidence and say, well, where do we find like very big female Tyrannosaurus rexes? It's just not there. Um, it's I don't recall exactly what the line of reasoning was for this whole hypothesis, but it certainly doesn't seem to be something that is very set in stone. And at best, we could maybe be seeing individual variation where you get a female that happens to be very big, much bigger than the average male, or a male that's much bigger than the average female. So, maybe that's that. But again, that's me being generous. And if I were being completely objective, I'd say that they should have just either made it more clear as to why the female is bigger, or just didn't say it at all.
Well, yeah, and in that case, again, I think you are definitely being very generous, and it's almost like a straw man, to be honest. If I were to be completely direct with this, it's they just say it very generally. They don't appear to be referencing this specific group, as far as I can tell. It's basically like when they're describing that group, it's basically how they are describing the entirety of the species, for all intents and purposes there. Or so it at least is shown from how they are framing and how they're presenting it. Now, the thing is that yes, there have been previously attempts to frame things like the so-called robust versus gracile morphs, where robust morphs tend to be mostly bigger, and thus also because they have, I think, they were found something to do with pelvis bones. They were thinking that they were, mostly indicative of a female, but the problem is that it has been already debunked and disproven time and time again that there is no actual consistency and relationship with those things. Even in Dr. Carr's recent paper, as one of the examples where that was the case, they have specifically tried to address this claim of sexual dimorphism, and they have not found anything remotely to be able to latch on to, even if they were to be generous, which most of the times they don't tend to be in this case. So I would definitely say that, objectively speaking, which is what we always try to do at least, or I would hope, I do not see any actual consistency there either. So it was probably because that was believed at the time. It was consistent maybe with those ideas that at the time they were hot, so they were probably using that. I think that's what it was. They don't reference it in the show, but I am kind of almost certain, because that was what's believed in the 90s, I think, roughly when we can trace this documentary back to, like, late 90s, early 2000s, I think.
And it wasn't even necessarily the only documentary that purported this. Like Walking with Dinosaurs is very infamous for this idea as well. So
Yes, that is correct. So it's, as you can tell, that there is a consistency between the portrayal there. They do appear to show and reflect what was believed at that time, very commonly among maybe many, but maybe not very commonly. Maybe it was just by few who were the so-called, if you will, celebrity paleontologists at the time, who made any kind of claims about this topic, and it just got stuck, and people just popularized the idea, and that was it. That's usually very, in fact, we see this more than it has, because back in the days there was no internet, and when it only just became a thing, it was not yet as big as now. And right now you can see a lot of times different people, they popularize ideas that might be completely out of thin air, and for some reason they are then being framed like they are scientific knowledge, which they are not. So, well, as quoting Malcolm, well, there it is. So, anything else to add to Tyrannosaurus, or shall we move on to the next one?
let's see when we move on to the next animal.
Okay, let's go. Let's go. What's next one on the list then? Was it Quetzalcoatlus or something
Yep,
else?
Quetzalcoatlus and Purgatorius are the only two animals left to talk about.
Okay. Well, Quetzalcoatlus uh, location though is New Mexico, so that's the only place where it would have met up with T-Rex. However, somehow it ended up being more on the northern side of the continent. So, based by the fact that we have animals that tend to be, the ecosystem that is mainly reflective of the northern side of the land, not the southern side. So I think that's one of the inaccuracies, if I were to say that. That is, if we exclude the possibility that they would travel this far if they wanted to look for food, but then again, because the local ecosystem would probably be abundant with food anyway, because they could just go for anything, be it a small hatchling, juvenile, or something similar to, like, very, something like an Ornithomimus size would probably do quite well, as a prey item as well if it wanted to kill something. And also we can look at carrion, variety of different dead animals that they could easily scavenge from to eat. Now, that said, I don't know if this is necessarily a stretch to say that they were able to come there that far, so I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I'd say that for Quetzalcoatlus, since we don't really have any evidence of Quetzalcoatlus being any further north than New Mexico or Texas, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say it's not impossible. I'm not going to say that it's like the worst idea in the world, but if we're looking at the evidence, it's right now all the Astarchids pterosaurs that we see further north and where we find Quetzalcoatlus are undescribed and either represent very different species to Quetzalcoatlus northropi or are completely different genuses of Asdarchid pterosaur entirely. So it's not really something that I don't think that it's it's just a bit of it's a little bit of a stretch, I would say. Not impossible, but right now it's like we're expanding the range of an animal that's only known from a relatively small part of the southwestern United States, to include it up further north into like the northwest and midwestern parts of the United States. For like example, South Dakota in this case, or in Montana, where in Walking with Dinosaurs they also have Quetzalcoatlus appear in. So in this case, I think that it's a bit of a stretch, little bit.
Bearing in mind also that Quetzalcoatlus is the only known named Asdarkid from this time period, 68 to 66 million years ago, in this continent. So there is no other Asdarkid that has actually been properly named or described. It's mostly just species in there, indeterminate or whatever. So, but otherwise, yes, it was very interesting to see it appear. Nevertheless, it was getting, and this is actually, and again, it's a bit of a tangent, but I know that there is a scene where in Prehistoric Planet, Quetzalcoatlus is seen literally owning a Tyrannosaurus Rex in a confrontation. I don't know the full context, whether the T-Rex was a fully grown T-Rex or not, but I can tell you that this depiction was more favorable to me in the sense that it was just more realistic to flee from an obviously more powerful animal that would probably be able to literally snap you in half in one bite. And I would think that when it comes to an adult Tyrannosaurus especially, Quetzalcoatlus just would not stand the chance to try to do anything. Like, yeah, sure, it could try to peck at its face to see if it can, cause a bit of a pain to force it to back down, because that's possible. You can potentially bully a much bigger animal to flee from you if you can inflict it enough pain. It's not unheard of. But I would say, if I were to choose which depiction to take, I would choose either to depict both situations where both could be possible, or I would depict the one that I think is more likely, is that it would choose to flee, which is the more likely case, unless it's cornered, or, and I don't remember if in Prehistoric Planet they were showing that if it was defending a nest or anything like that. If it was the case, then yes, that's a different story. I've seen many animals that are much smaller to go up against bigger animals defending their nest and their hatchlings when they just go absolutely berserk mode. That's a different story. So correct me if there is anything going on with that. But I find that depiction of it fleeing to be more realistic.
So I would say that in terms of depiction, yeah, I think that Quetzalcoatlus is quite a bit more accurate this time around. And well, it's definitely pretty realistic. Fits with the animal itself. I will say the claim that they say that Quetzalcoatlus had would have been a fish out of water when it's walking on land. Probably not all that accurate these days, since especially as darkids are considered to have been very, very capable of walking around on land and such. Um, and I think for Quetzalcoatlus, I don't think it would have been a fish out of water per se. The scavenging the Triceratops, I think, is fine. I know people seem to think it became a bit of a trope, but I mean, it's not inaccurate to say that Quetzalcoatlus could have done that. And you know what? I got to be honest, really appreciated how this documentary referred to it as King of the Pterosaurs, because in a certain other documentary that I'm going to try and not reference again, they had another pterosaur be referred to as like the biggest um, of all time, when Quetzalcoatlus, even back then, was still considered the largest, to my knowledge. So, anyways, Quetzalcoatlus, King of the Pterosaurs. I don't know if it still holds that title nowadays, but I don't know. It just feels it feels very appreciable, since it is definitely one of the biggest out there. Maybe second, depending on how big Hetzegopteryx is, but still, I don't know. gave this animal quite a bit of respect in my point of view. So.
Well, now you made me want to ask you which documentary was it that you did not want to reference?
Walking with Dinosaurs again. I've
Oh
referenced
yeah,
it probably
yeah.
twice. Yeah.
Yeah.
We will get to it. We will get to
Oh yeah,
Walking
we
with
will.
Dinosaurs.
We absolutely will. Yes.
But I didn't want to like reference it again because it's like I've been referencing it a few times. Uh, so
For the sake of not sounding like a broken record, I suppose.
right, right.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to mention about the Quetzalcoatlus?
I'm pretty satisfied with it. I think we can move on to Purgatorius.
Okay, let's go for it. I personally don't have a whole lot to say about it, but you can have a go at this one. This one is all yours.
So the reason why I include Purgatorius is even though it's only mentioned by name in the very last shot of the documentary where they say, but for Purgatorius, uh, the future belongs to them, and it's like the final part of the monologue at the very end. So that's why I included Purgatorius. As far as term as far as I can tell, the only material we have of it are teeth and jawbones. Now, mammal teeth can do a very good job of identifying what an animal may have looked like because of just how actually, no, scratch that. Mammal teeth can help identify what animal we might be. Mammal teeth might be able to help identify what an animal could have been related to and such. And based on the teeth of Purgatorius, it's so far considered to be an early member of, like, one of the very earliest members of Primata. It's considered part of the primate group, even though I forget what its exact group is. Maybe Plesiodapomorphs. Someone in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong about this. Um, Obviously, teeth are not a good gauge for necessarily how an animal may have looked, and so we don't really have a complete skeleton of Purgatorius to really gauge. Based on its ankle bones, though, it's been hypothesized to have been very good at climbing trees. So some depictions, as I've shown here, show it as a bit like a tree shrew sort of animal, which, I don't know how accurate that is. I would always encourage we find more material of it, but it definitely at least fits the bill a little bit closer than an opossum because opossums uh, are not. I mean, as far as they do climb trees, but they do not. They're not like as nimble in trees as maybe Purgatorius or other might have been. And I'm just saying all this because under the assumption that this thing may have been very tree shrew-like, which again I would argue we need to find more evidence of, even though the ankle bones are a good start, and um, but we still need to have like more of a complete skeleton to have a fully to be able to fully reconstruct this thing. Right now, our best basis for it is teeth and jawbones, which are not bad, but um, as always, the more material we have, the better. But I thought I would at least give a slide to Purgatorius because it is an animal that is mentioned by name in the documentary, and so wanted to give it a bit of love as a result of that. So
Absolutely. Approve very much of that sentiment. And uh, by the way, the bottom right on the, where you have a photo of the remains on the finger, is that yours by any chance or not?
that is not mine.
Oh, okay.
I forget whose it is, but it is not mine.
Okay. I thought maybe you found some and you took a picture as well, so I thought maybe you decided to quickly just insert that in. I was just thinking, well, that would be cool if it was. But yeah, that's okay.
I would if I can find any photos where I'm holding a specimen of an animal in a documentary down the line, I will absolutely put it there. But for right now, for this one, this is not mine.
Okay. So, uh, what do you wanna do? What do you wanna talk about next? Which slide shall we go into?
Let's go to the late Cretaceous size increase.
Okay,
slide.
let's go for that. Now, I want to also bear in mind that Ankylosaurus and Pachycephalosaurus do not actually appear in this documentary program. So just so
Correct.
you guys understand. So you don't think, oh, where did they get these ones from? They were never in the show, so why are they mentioning them? But there is a point to it. So, John, do you want to have a go?
Yes. So, as mentioned earlier, they have Phil Curry be the main paleontologist for this final segment, and they have him talking about Tyrannosaur pack hunting and such. He also talks a bit about, because there's multiple segments with him talking about certain things, one of which is the fact that there is a size increase for late Cretaceous dinosaurs. And it's sort of been talked about during the episode where they talk about Triceratops is really big and Montosaurus really big, Tyrannosaurus Rex very big, and then they tie it back into Phil Curry where he mentions, yeah, you notice this increase in size among certain late Cretaceous dinosaur lineages where you have each of these animals being either the biggest or among the biggest of their lineages. So in Montosaurus, even though it's questionable how big it could have gotten, was pretty big for a hadrosaur. Tyrannosaurus Rex is still considered the largest theropod dinosaur known to existence. Triceratops is one of the largest ceratopsians. I think it's neck and neck with Eotriceratops, but at the very least, it's up there in terms of like one of the biggest, if not the biggest ceratopsian. Pachycephalosaurus is the largest pachycephalosaur to my knowledge, and Ankylosaurus is the largest ankylosaur, if not the largest thyreophorine or armored dinosaur that we know of. But I think it might actually be the biggest armored dinosaur that we know of. So um, I don't know if there's any particular evidence that would argue as to why they got this big. The documentary sort of paints it as that the environment itself was becoming uh, it had a very specific climatic regime that encouraged uh, size increases, which could be true. But I think there's a lot of factors that play into this. Like, for example, if you get hadrosaurs that get a lot bigger, or ceratopsians or ankylosaurs that get bigger as a means of defense, you're going to get theropods that get much bigger in order to be able to hunt them. Uh, and it could easily be something as simple as either the theropods got bigger or the herbivores got bigger, and as a result of that, their prey or their predators ended up getting bigger so that they could uh, better hunt them. This is again very speculative and probably something that can't be directly answered without some very specific information. But I wanted to at least talk about it because they brought it up in the documentary, and because I have a habit of including these slides in because um, the documentary goes out of its way to have paleontologists come in and talk about certain concepts. And I think it is an interesting idea to talk about, why do we see so many of these dinosaurs get so big by the end of the Cretaceous? But I think the ultimate answer is going to be pretty complicated. I don't know um, if it can be cited as simply because of the climate changing. I think there's a lot of factors that play into why you have increases and decreases in faunal sizes. So that's
There
what I've
is
got for this
there
slide.
is the other side of it as well that you have to consider, maybe the niche partitioning as well, because we notice that we almost never see major apex size, or if you will, just really massively sized predators that potentially share the same similar ecosystems to be of similar size. They tend to either one tends to outgrow. An example of this is Dinosuchus, for example, right? Dinosuchus was freaking massive. It was huge. It was about good 10 maybe meters long, to put it very solid, if you will, a solid number on it. It's very badly preserved in terms of the amount of specimens we have, and I'm talking about the larger species that is actually better understood than the type species. So the Rio Grandensis is the one I'm referring to. But when that went extinct, then all of a sudden Tyrannosaurus became bigger as well, because Dinosuchus went extinct quite a while before the first T-Rex appeared on the record, while at the same time the biggest predator that was around during the times of Dinosuchus would have probably just been the Spletosaurus, one of the species basically, or maybe potentially it might have coexisted with both, if we talk about the time period itself. In terms of the location, that's a different story. It's something that is very long conversation, not for this video. But same you can also find in South American Purosaurus during the Miocene as well, or if you look at the Titanoboa, even though it was a pescivore, but still, it was the top in terms of its niche, at least at the time. And yeah, there is something to do with that. I'm pretty sure there has something to do with that. Hatzegopteryx was the top predator on an otherwise island that was populated by pretty much dwarf megafauna, if you will, in Romania, which is today basically Romania. And then you also have this parallel between the Spinosaurids, Carcharodontosaurids, but notice that only one ever truly dominates the size niche. Then Ankylosaurus, I think you were correct. I agree. I think it's actually just the biggest armored dinosaur overall. Even if it's not as tall as Stegosaurus, for example, I believe it was much tankier because of just the mass and the body outline. It was just too tanky. And Pachycephalosaurus, 100% correct. It exceeds every other member of the family by a very large margin. We're talking almost twice the size of them, of the largest ones that come after it, which is either Stegosaurus or Prinocephaly, if I'm correct. So they too are very similar in size, but they are almost half the size of Pachycephalosaurus. Almost half. Maybe a bit more than maybe a bit bigger than a half. We would say maybe 1.5, but depends how you look at it, I guess, based on the estimate. So yeah, arms and armor race, I guess, is the one way to address it. Which one started the race is hard to say, but the others obviously keeps keeping up. That's what I was gonna say. Yes. So yeah, there we go. Anything else to add to this?
I think we've covered as much as we can for this one. So if you want to move on to the next one, which I think the next one on my list would be the Dinosaur Decline segment.
Yep. Sounds good. Let's. Here it is. So, what did you want to mention about the Dinosaur Decline?
So, compared to all the other segments, Phil Curry has, I think, four segments where he talks about certain ideas, and one of them is the idea that were dinosaurs in decline before the asteroid hit the Gulf of Mexico. And this is a very complicated discussion that I think would be worth an individual video on the channel. Just us talking about it, and passing along different ideas and such. But for the sake of this video, the brief idea is that you see a general trend, at least according to Phil Curry, that from for example, the Campanian stage, which is represented by the Dinosaur Park um, mural by Julius Sotogni up top in the top right. That dinosaurs were apparently much more diverse, and over time, as you get later on in the Cretaceous, from the Campanian to the Maastrichtian, dinosaurs for some reason seem to show a bit of a decline in terms of diversity and such, which I think is, I'm not gonna say it's a bad idea, but it's something that that I feel anyways needs a lot of data to really back. Because again, like I think a big chunk of why dinosaurs may have, well, you can maybe see disparages between different stages in the Cretaceous in terms of diversity. It could just be because of preservation issues. It could be a variety of things that may, even if they look like it's evidence for dinosaur decline, it could just be like natural ecological processes that don't really necessarily show that dinosaurs were in decline, but that maybe some areas were just better at supporting dinosaurs than others. In the case of like Laramidia during the Cretaceous period, it's obvious that we do see quite a few dinosaurs, like Triceratops is very common throughout the northern states. But when you go further south, it's not. It's replaced by different ceratopsians, and Montosaurus, same deal, where it's very common in the northern states and of Canada, but it doesn't really appear down south. You have like Cretasaurus and other large hadrosaurs down south. Um, Tyrannosaurus rex happens to be one of the few constants where you see it basically be like the apex predator of both Canada and the northern United States, as well as the southern United States in like Texas and New Mexico. But there are two very distinct ecologies going on either side of Laramidia during the late Cretaceous. And even though there's similarities between both, between between certain formations, I'm not sure if it's enough to say that that is a sign of dinosaur diversity decline. And on the bottom there is all the dinosaurs and animals known from the Hell. I think it's just dinosaurs known from the Hell Creek Formation, which I know that not all of them lived exactly the same time, but I think it just gives you a good sense of, there's still quite a bit of variety amongst dinosaurs, um, even back during the very end of the Cretaceous. And I think the idea that dinosaurs were in decline by that point, I think even though obviously there were things like the Deccan traps, volcanism going on and such, I think that this is a subject that needs further study, and I've seen it passed along before. And even though I appreciate the documentary bringing it up, I just think that it needs its own proper discussion almost to really verify how true it is or not, because I think there's a lot of conflicting factors at play.
I would probably put it down as much simpler argument to highlight this point and maybe address it. It's that decline of diversity of megafauna does not necessarily mean the set decline of megafauna full stop. What I mean by that is it just means that certain groups and families of them just become more dominant and pretty much hold the monopoly, basically, on the ecological niche. That doesn't necessarily mean that the dinosaurs as a whole actually are declining, though. It just means that the ones that have disappeared, they opened up a space for the other ones to expand. That's all there is to it. Now, of course, you can argue that with that, the collapse comes afterwards because it's similar to how, certain things happen in real life, other parallels, but I don't want to get into that. But I would think that, yeah, true, diversity actually has declined to a quite a large degree, because if you were to go by every single group that is featured in that little box that you have included with the size chart with the silhouettes, you can see that Lambeosaurines and Centrosaurines are absent completely from that chart because they've already disappeared, at least in North America. All the while, though, Lambeosaurines, as far as I know, were still around all the way up until the extinction in Asia or Eurasia as a whole, and even as far back as in where else? Morocco, in Africa too. So it depends. Like, when we talk about overall these type of things, are we talking about specific ecosystems only, or are we talking about worldwide? And when we're centering on things like Hell Creek, are we not, or just overall the Laramidia, since this is the best well-known one, but are we not putting ourselves potentially at risk of generalizing the entirety of the world of dinosaurs based solely on that one fragment out of all of them worldwide that have also now revealed a decent portion of information to us about what they were like in other parts of the world, which we never used to know, obviously, prior to,
I
the.
definitely think that I feel like this idea is very biased, or not biased, but it definitely takes a lot of stock from North America specifically. It doesn't. I don't know if when people and I don't mean to actually take people out of context when people say this, but when people talk about dinosaurs in decline, I feel like a lot of they put a lot of emphasis on North America as showing where this decline is. When even during the Campanian, we are very biased in the fossil record in favor of North America compared to other parts of the world. We don't really have much for Africa. We do have quite a bit from Central Asia, but I mean, Asia is a massive continent, so there's plenty of places where we could use more evidence for um, material from besides China and Mongolia. Europe isn't. I don't know if there's a whole lot of material from Europe that is very substantial during the Campanian stage of the Cretaceous. And so as a result of that, you have a situation where a lot of this is based off of what we see in North America because of how much variety of stuff we get from North America without taking into account what the situation was like elsewhere in the world. So I think that definitely plays a part in how this sort of becomes a little bit misconstrued with dinosaurs declining by the very end.
I'm almost tempted to make a very offensive and insensitive joke about something, but I'm not gonna do it. I will do it to you when we finish the show. But anyway,
Oh boy.
yeah. But anyway, I think yeah, it's important to compare. Basically, go time by time stamp and just see what else is known elsewhere. And I think you might actually be able to find some interesting information, because where, let's say in North America, where certain groups of animals like Columbiasaurans have declined and disappeared off the record, to our knowledge at least, uh, anything basically post Horseshoe Canyon formation, anything basically younger than that, does not show Columbiasauran remains, to our knowledge at least. Or yeah, it doesn't actually. It's true. I don't believe it does. Anything else, maybe in some other parts, maybe contemporary to it, but not actually younger. But anywhere else in the world, like Africa and even like Europe and Asia, they very much have quite a few of them around, and they seem to have been doing pretty well until obviously the whole thing went to, under, yeah, well, under. So yeah, I would definitely go bit by bit and compare it, but I think that it's true that maybe because we have the most amount of it from North America is why we tend to fall into this trap of generalizing the rest of it, whereas it's not necessarily the correct way of doing it. Anyway,
Right.
do you want to add anything else to it or move on to the next stage?
Let's move on to the next slide.
Okay. Which I believe is basically the what was it? The
KPG
KPG,
mass extinction.
the extinction, and then after that is the epilogue, right?
Yep. Yep.
So KPG mass extinction. So here we go. Of course, they do show this, classic, you know, meteor lands, and then there is explosion and fires that engulfs everything. Like, it's quite basically the classic image of everything that they've always told us in the children's books. So what do you think about this?
It's pretty straightforward in terms of how it portrays the extinction. It doesn't linger on it for too long, and it actually shows. What I like about this one is that they show the dinosaurs reacting to, which I know is like, well, but they do it in other documentaries. But I feel like this is one of the. I always like it when you see the dinosaurs' reactions to things to the extinction because it really highlights like um you're seeing essentially the world coming to an end, and these animals are just trying to escape with their lives and whatnot. I like that, I guess, in any documentary that does this. But yeah, so they essentially it's a pretty condensed version of the mass extinction where meteorite hits, wildfires start going off. They don't show any tidal waves or any tsunamis that occur as a result of it, but like in some other documentaries, but eventually leads to a point where first light reveals just how bad things get. I don't know when first light would have happened after um the ejecta cloud that blankets the earth would have been lifted. I don't know when that would have been, but and I'm really not sure where they got most of this footage from for like all the trees and such that are just smoky and ruined and whatnot. But it definitely gives you the impression that yeah, things got messed up real bad. Which I don't think there's anything like especially spectacular about the extinction that's like, oh my gosh, this is like really phenomenal. But at the same time, I think it's still does a good job of like showing us what the KPGX mass extinction was like. I like the music. I like the the set pieces shown to show the visuals. Um, and I think overall it still holds up really well to what we know now. I mean, there's probably more details they could have added, but I think for what it's worth, it still works, I think.
I find it very interesting, however, to look at it. That it seems to me that this would have indicated where the immediate, basically, surroundings where the extinction would have happened much quicker, which would be obviously where the meteor landed. But I presume that the rest of the world may have taken a little bit longer, perhaps. But then again, it would probably not be a matter of hundreds or thousands of years. It might have been a matter of literally, I don't even know, to give a. How long do you think it would have taken, basically, for the entire planet to get engulfed into this, cloud of
It would have
darkness?
taken a while. It would have definitely taken longer than like I know I've seen documentaries where they say it took a year. It's like it probably would have taken much longer than a year um for the entire planet to be covered in an ejecta cloud. I just think for an impact like that to happen and that to happen to so quickly, I think that could be seen as a bit of a stretch. But
But
I
wouldn't
will
that?
say that
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think specifically with North America, I think the effects um would have been felt much faster than say all the way across like to Asia per se. Um
I was thinking maybe the best way to look at it is how quickly would have it taken, like how quickly would the whole thing travel around, the cloud, the darkness, how quickly does it spread, at which speed? Because if it spreads basically at speed of, I don't know, an airplane flying, for example, that could take you a matter of days, maybe, to engulf the entire planet. If you're talking
that's
about,
true.
yeah, if you're talking about, a speed of a car, well, that could probably take you a matter of weeks or months, perhaps, and maybe we could be looking at a year or so, like you said. And I'm talking about the average speed of a car, so let's say, I don't know,
Yeah.
like 40 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour, maybe. If it was even that much. But let's say basically how quickly would it take to spread around? Or was it just gradually spreading around, like, taking hold and then eventually going and going without anything else around it noticing? But basically not to the point
Yeah.
where it would exceed the margin that would justify putting the entire extinction of the dinosaurs to 65 million years ago, because it would sure as hell never take a million years for that to happen, I'm pretty sure. Like, it doesn't sound very plausible to me at all. I would think it
Yeah.
took much quicker than that, but maybe not a matter of, let's say, seconds, of course.
No. I feel like if they haven't been done yet, I'm sure there's studies being done about, how fast could the ejecta cloud have been able to expand across the entire Earth, but I don't know off the top of my head if we have any specifics for that. Um, but it would be an interesting point of study and would help, flesh out, how fast did things just go downhill once that ejecta cloud was properly covering the whole Earth. Um, and when that would have been chronologically, like how many years it could have taken, or how many days. I know I'm saying it would have taken about a year or longer, but if it really was that fast, like then you could be taught as fast as like your average plane. Then you're talking like with over the course of several days, weeks maybe. But
The other thing that is very fascinating about this extinction is just the general implication of it, is how much of both the aquatic and terrestrial megafauna got taken out point blank, basically, just completely erased from fossil record, while certain other portions of animals just completely were like, yeah, we're fine, basically. Crocodilians come to mind, alligatoroids, etc., like lizards, snakes, different frog species, whatever,
Right.
Dinosaurs are another example as well that persisted for a while, I believe. They are
I
the
think
aquatic ones, so.
yeah, I know there's like specific arguments that suggest why those animals were able to survive longer than dinosaurs. I mean, one thing is that the smaller you are, the better chance you are of hiding and the fewer resources you need to survive. But for things like crocodiles and such, like it's I know there's like specific arguments for why they were able to survive compared to other animals, but I don't know them off the top of my head. I would have to refresh my memory and go back, but it definitely does. It's definitely worth a discussion on. You look at all the animals that were able to make it, and it is interesting how even though none of them were as big as the dinosaurs or as big as mosasaurs or as big as pterosaurs per se, that there are some animals that you would think would have suffered worse, and yet were able to pull through at the end. So
But many dinosaurs that were literally tiny in size as well that existed. Like, if you're talking about size-related issue, why, for example, Leptoceratops didn't make it, as an example, or
right.
why Pachycephalosaurids and Ornithomimids, Oviraptors never made it? You know, those ones.
Right,
Why some of
right.
the species of other, maybe ornithopods, etc., like why the ones that are on a smaller size, why haven't they made it? Why haven't some of the carnivorous theropods on a smaller size, from variety of different, genera, why haven't they made it through? Why have they all been wiped out? But the other
Right,
animals,
exactly.
they still persisted. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah,
Like there is no way I can think of that might consistently just give you one solid answer to why that was the case and how it does not apply to anything else when you try to compare the arguments.
yeah.
So, anything else on this one, or shall we go to the epilogue?
I think we can go to the epilogue.
All right, let's go to the epilogue, and here we have this shot of uh, what is it, an eagle or something, or a vulture, and we
I
have.
think it's supposed to be a I think it's supposed to be a vulture. I was trying to find an image that mimicked the one at the end of the show where it shows a bird and then it says to remind us of the giants that are gone, and then it has like a whole compilation of scenes from the show itself talking about the dinosaurs. The reason why I wanted to make a slide about this is that I think I don't I know this is our first documentary that we're covering on your channel, and I know that this may adjust depending on how uh, we view each and every documentary. But I personally consider this one of the best, if not the best, ways to end a documentary. It doesn't depict dinosaurs as like, well, now they're gone. Look at the mammals. Aren't they cool? And look at the birds. Aren't they, descended from dinosaurs and all that? They actually dedicate a good chunk of time to, I mean, well, I say good chunk of time, enough time to sort of reminisce about the dinosaurs and why and just something to admire them for being so successful and for living and being the dominant animals on the planet, terrestrially speaking anyways, for over 160 million years. And I think a lot of people, I guess I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I feel like there are at least some people out there that look at the fact that dinosaurs are extinct and say, well, they're just evolutionary failures. There's nothing to celebrate about them. They're gone. And so, and I just think that's very oversimplifies the fact that dinosaurs took up a massive, massive portion of Earth's history. And it took a meteorite and a bunch of other things at the 11th hour to wipe them out. And I think that's something worth celebrating and why I think paleontology is not just a awesome field for dinosaurs, but why it's important because we're looking at these animals that lived for so long and studying how much they lived is equally as important as understanding why they died out. And so as a result, and the reason, and so yeah, when John Goodman says, it's unlikely anything so huge or captivating will ever come this way again, it's like, I mean, obviously, we don't know what the future of Earth looks like or the future of life on this planet is like, but I think there's something meaningful that I take away from the idea that dinosaurs are animals that broke all these conventions and were so successful at doing it. And even though we have lots of very large animals today, none of them are as big as the largest dinosaurs. None of them have been able to last as necessarily as long as the dinosaurs have up until this point. And I just think there's something worth celebrating with that. And I think this is one of the best documentaries that does it. Um,
I agree,
so
but of course you are forgetting the blue whale. But obviously you're talking about terrestrial, I suppose. So
right, okay, yeah, blue whale. Well, whales in general,
yeah.
but
But again, it's
I feel
there's a different feeling about it though. When you, I mean, of course, I've never seen a whale up front. Unfortunately, I hope that one day I will be able to. I'm definitely have that on my bucket list to be able to see a whale, you know, in front of me, or just in a very close proximity. Hopefully, the blue one and bigger sized one as well. So you know, the fully grown adult, so that I can actually see how big it is. But at the same time, I have seen, however, an African elephant full-sized before, and knowing that something as big as, like, say, Argentinosaurus or Patagotitan that would just absolutely dwarf this elephant walked this planet one time, I would be. It's pretty interesting, to put it mildly, and there's many different flavors to that word. I can tell you that much. Yo.
sorry, you cut out for me.
Oh, okay. No, I just went silent and I was hoping that you were gonna interject with something. I didn't realize there was gonna be an
Oh, well,
awkward
you're
silence.
correct about about whales and such, and obviously, like, I guess the only reason why I didn't bring up whales is because the reason why whales can get that big is because they live in water. At least that's part of the reason why. With dinosaurs, it's just incredible that you can get animals to be of this magnitude, whether it's Argentinosaurus or even a Apatosaurus. You go to like the Field Museum in Chicago and you look at that Apatosaurus there, and even though it's obviously smaller than the Patagotitan they have in the main hall now, um, it's just incredible that again you look at this thing and you're like, this thing used to exist and it used to walk around and it used to be as capable as any other animal of living its life and growing to that size. And I think there's definitely documentaries that look at the extinction of dinosaurs and think, well, it's important because it means that we're on this planet, or it's important because without that meteorite we wouldn't have existed. And I think that kind of devalues um dinosaurs as a family, or and the same thing when people are like, well, we still have birds, and it's like, well, yeah, birds are descended from dinosaurs, but dinosaurs as a family includes so many animals that we just are not able to see anymore. And the idea that these things were real, that existed, that lived on this planet and lived for so long compared to other families that die out over the course of like only a few million years. Um, I just think that's very impressive, and I think it's worth celebrating. And I think, and again, this might just be very sentimental of me for saying this, but I think it's the reason why I love this epilogue and why I love the way they ended everything for this documentary is it's not a cynical, or it doesn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. It makes me feel very good about learning about dinosaurs and teaching people about dinosaurs and why dinosaurs are worth studying and talking about. Again, that's probably not very objective of me, and I will say it's partially because of my bias towards this documentary. But there are other documentaries that kind of just have a very meh feeling at the end, and I'm glad this is one that doesn't have that. So, for
I
me, anyways.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I definitely felt like the ending was really good. I It left me with a good taste as well. Once it's all been said and done, and I really thought that it was just really nice to kind of think. It's like there is a bittersweet feeling to it at the end. It's like on one hand, we are here that we are able to, study these animals and learn so much about them in our lifetime. But on the other hand, the bitter part of it is that, well, the only ones that have survived basically are what maybe at best, and I'm being maybe generous if I say it's 1% of all the dinosaurs out of the whole like big clade. And I'm talking about aves as a group in general. Like, what do they make up? 1%? 5%? Less than 1%? Give me a number in the comments if you can pinpoint it. My math is terrible, by the way, just so you know. But yeah, that's nowhere near enough, in my opinion, to be able to say that because birds are here, that therefore we look at them and we can just think of what dinosaurs were like all of a sudden. Yes, I agree, there are some times we can do it, but there are, I would say, most times we probably cannot. Realistically speaking, we probably cannot. And we never will be able to. I don't think we will be able to. And again, realistically speaking, I don't think we'll be able to. Now,
Right.
Is there any? Shall we move on to the final part that you made? What was it?
Sure. I
final
think the
thoughts.
final slide that I have is the final thoughts.
Yes. This is
our
basically where
general...
we see, what is going on. So, do you want to say what stood out to you the most, and then I will probably go into my side of things of this. As you can see, this is basically the caption of all of the, just basically screenshots of all of the episodes that have been featured, with the cover, if you will, image in the middle of the two T-Rexes there.
Sure. I will try to keep this brief because given how much I really love this documentary, it would be very easy for me to like just go on and on and on. But I think what stood out to me the most in rewatching it is how much for all the inaccuracies that do exist, and this documentary does have its fair share of inaccuracies. I am genuinely impressed by how much still holds up today, how much uh holds like it's still like, oh, that isn't wrong, or that still is like, oh, that's still pretty accurate to what we know about dinosaurs or this dinosaur today. And I think the reason why that's important to me is that if I were to go and I were to, for example, show this to any of my friends or family who were like, hey, John, we want to see what one of the documentaries you like to watch is like, and I would, this is probably the one that I would go to. This is the one that I think I could realistically show and feel the most comfortable with, knowing that um, they're gonna be able to be taught a lot of things about dinosaurs that are generally, for the most part, accurate. There are things that may not hold up as well, obviously, but in general, it's going to be something that I will share with people, and don't I won't feel like I'm just showing them a documentary that's just lying to them or is embellishing things to an absurd degree. I'm showing them something that they can take away from having learned a few things, and if they have any questions about it, I can always elaborate further on it. But I just appreciate how much this documentary still holds up, and even after like 20 years of it existing, I can still recommend it to people because it's just a really good watch. And I think for anyone who is not into dinosaurs or is learning about dinosaurs still, I think this is a good documentary to show them. So that's my ultimate takeaway from When Dinosaurs Roamed America.
Yeah, I agree. I would very much be happy to recommend this to anybody who is trying to get into this, and because I think one thing that it does pretty well is that it introduces you to the topic in a very nice way without trying to be overly in your face about certain things, certain points that they bring up. For example, everything is just feels, most of it, at least to me, it felt a lot more subtle. Even sometimes when they made some extraordinary claims about something like the reverse sexual dimorphism in T-Rexes, for example, that we talked about in this episode, or maybe a few other things back there which I cannot remember anymore because it's just been so long ago, but if we were to go back, there probably were some there here and there. Or the fact that in the episode, episode 4, they completely just misrepresented, by mistake obviously, because at the time that's not what was believed yet, but they completely misrepresented what some of the animals actually were there, right? Like Tyrannosaurus, well, they thought it was a Coelurosaur and the Dromaeosaur. They are two of the different ones, but in actual fact we're just know that it's a Suskityrannus, right? So, while all the while at the same time, Northern being so spot on. And I wanted to say, by the way, this is one thing I wanted to insert for sure, that I would say if I were to pick my favorite creature design, in the whole documentary, I'm probably gonna stick with Northern. I think I'm pretty solid, I think, on that choice for this documentary. So, what about yourself? Which creature or multiples would you pick as your favorite and best shown designs?
Well, definitely Nothronicus is up there. Um, I do like the Tyrannosaurus Rex design, even though it's not necessarily up there in terms of my all-time favorites. It's definitely one of those that I still really like. I am still very favorable towards the Dilophosaurus design, the Coelophysis design. Um, I think the Nothronicus I think still comes out on top as like definitely like the best, but there's a lot of really good designs, and it's kind of hard to pick out which one is my all-time favorite. I guess really, if I had to choose, it would probably be Dilophosaurus. And I understand that it still got some things about it that are inaccurate, but overall, I think it's still definitely um I really like it a lot. So I would stick to that as my favorite. And in terms of like objectively best, I think for right now I'm gonna choose Nothronicus for design.
Now, that is also not to say that. Notice that we have skipped few parts about Tyrannosaurus. For example, I didn't address the issue with the fact that it doesn't have lips, which again I still stand on that point, even after the paper has been published. My view is very much the same, with the only difference in general, without going too deep into it, is that I think that finally that side of the argument decided to publish their views in a scientific literature and actually putting it out there for this kind of discussion, where now professionals across the field can now address it and see what to do with it as they fit, if you will. While before it was only restricted to just basically discussions on, blogs and Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else you want to put there. So, yeah, I'm glad that's the only difference. Everything else in terms of what has been presented, I remain the same. But we're going to make maybe a separate kind of video where we might address those things, and maybe we might invite other people additionally to address these issues as they are. So just that's to address the fact that in previous episode I did mention that I might bring it up, but I decided that I don't want to ultimately get into it too much, because I don't want to have a overly 2 hour long video, since it's already almost getting to the 2 hours length now. So with that said, yeah, solid documentary overall. Has its problems, but very easily corrected once you get past the initial stage of introduction, in my opinion. So you have this way of introducing people to dinosaurs through this, and then you can start adding more nuances by yourself, which I think this documentary makes it very easy, because there is not a lot of material you have to go through in order to, reshuffle everything that is being shown. So as of today, in my personal opinion as well, and I believe this is quite an. Would you agree that it's probably very accurate to say that this channel as a whole, uh, its stance towards this documentary is that it holds reasonably well. I wouldn't say crazy amazing or whatever, but I would say reasonably well, objectively speaking, if it were to be made today as it was made back then. So what do you think?
I agree. I agree. I think with currents, if someone were to say, for example, remake this with maybe a bigger budget and with the knowledge of like more material on hand, I think this could be definitely go from silver to gold from silver to gold standard for documentaries, but I think right now it's still a really good quality silver, which, compared to certain other documentaries that exist on this planet, that's a really high bar. So, yep, I'm I'm satisfied with this.
Yeah,
Even
I would give it a solid silver as well, like a very nice
yes,
polished silver, if you will. So,
so
and yeah, I agree. That's probably one of the highest there. I don't think there is any documentary in regards to dinosaurs. Well, I mean, we could maybe argue and do the review later when it comes to Cenozoic or Paleozoic segments, which are not many, by the way. There are few of them only, but once we get to review them, we can argue whether they can potentially beat the silver mark. Maybe they could get to, like, you know, a gold. Whether it's going to be an
right.
80, whether it's going to be an 18 karat gold, I don't know. But maybe there might be a way to say there is some kind of gold there, potentially there, you know. So we shall see. But as far as dinosaur documentary goes, I think this is a solid silver, and this is also probably better in my book, or at the very least on the same line of silvers with few others that we will eventually get into and we will review as well. So, is there anything else you wanted to add, or shall I just conclude the video
Nope.
altogether?
I think we can call this a wrap for when dinosaurs roamed America.
Yeah, I kind of feel like because the gaps between the episodes have been so massive due to obviously us being busy with our real life, commitments and work and all of these things, it's took us freaking ages to do it. But I do want, and I genuinely mean this, I do want to try and make an effort to find more times for us to do more reviews of these type of documentaries, and this might even give me an excuse to watch to watch some of the new ones, even though I know for a fact that I'm gonna cringe quite a lot, but I will have to do it anyway for you guys. And I will have probably go back to rewatch some of the older ones just to get a much more fresh perspective, and so I can take some notes as well. So with that in mind, I think it's pretty safe to say that thank you for being patient with us, those who stuck around to conclude this particular journey, and off to the next one we go. And I predict at least that the next one we it might be a bit more complicated to do for a variety of reasons, but we're probably gonna go into prehistoric planet since it's kind of quite hot as right now, even though it's died down. The hype itself is died down even since the second season, I think, release. So it's not quite like crazy, but it's still worth looking at given that it's very fresh. Alternatively, if people personally find that they want actually for us to look at something older and something maybe different, maybe they might want us to go into the Walking With series or into maybe some other ones like the other BBC's Planet Dinosaur, for example, or something entirely different. Maybe one thing I will know that I definitely do not want to do Jurassic Fight Club and Dinosaur Revolution as the next ones, and maybe potentially not at all. I don't know. Like, to me, I just cannot take them seriously enough to even consider for a serious review. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, you have the final say in terms of which documentaries we want to do, or which ones we want to do next, or which ones we want to do at all. But I will say that, Jurassic Fight Club and Dinosaur Revolution, I mean, we can cover them, but I feel like I wouldn't want to cover them right away. I would want to cover them maybe well after we get through some of these other ones that I think are worth more discussion on. Like, for example, Walking with Dinosaurs, Planet Dinosaur, Prehistoric Planet. I think those are going to be ones that um, I would probably prefer to go first. And whichever one you want to do, I will be down for it. So,
Yeah, the reason why I'm obviously a little hesitant on one hand, even though I still want to go ahead with it as the next project, it's a prehistoric planet. It's because I have had other people from my crew as well express well, from our team basically, because at this point I would say it's almost fair to include them as my team members for the channel, since they are regular guest speakers whenever we do have guest speakers, and they are not just channel guests, but they are actually part of the crew in terms of, they also help me with maintaining my server and gatekeeping the hell out of it to keep the crazes out as well. Cough, cough. But yeah, I am thinking that we are gonna have more people from episode to episode, depending on who wants to focus on which episode. So I'm thinking there is a potential that it's gonna be me, you, and Jason as the regular trio doing every episode, because Jason, if you remember, he shared quite a lot of notes. So, and that is not to mention that.
Yes, he did.
That is not to mention that after me and you have a detailed look at the program, we will also have our own notes. Then we'll have to sit down and compare it, and then we'll have to put it together into some kind of material that we'll be presenting. So I think there's going to be quite a lot to do. And then we will, of course, we might even go as far as inviting other episode by episode type of guest speakers. For example, maybe some episodes Jeffrey might want to jump in if he finds any particular interest, or he wants to do a particular coverage of some topics. I know that Idnas has expressed interest to do episodes which feature a Triceratops, I believe, because very predictable of him. Yes, if there is a Triceratops, he's gonna be there for sure. And this one is an exception because this is our sole project as of now. But yeah, there's another few other examples. I'm pretty sure, I think Dr. Thomas Carr expressed some interest as well to come on on some of the episodes, even though we didn't go into details yet, but he did express at least a mild interest in that as well. But yeah, so there's a lot to do. There's definitely a lot to do, but we'll do our best. That's all we can promise. What happens, happens, I guess. You agree?
100%.
Okay, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching, and if you are new to the channel, please make sure you catch up with some of our older content and give this one a like. Let us know, share your thoughts with us, what it is that you would like to see maybe, or anything else, and just wanted to say thank you for watching, and you guys take care. Have a lovely time, be it evening or morning, afternoon. Bye bye.
Ciao.